The legacy of Alexander the Great runs deep in the mind of every Greek. The Hellenes were once at the top of the world in every way imaginable, but now they find themselves and their influence shrinking. The Roman Empire was first a Latin empire and then a Greek empire, but no matter whose empire it has always been a home for the Hellenes. It is in the nature of a Greek to seek new lands though. The Odyssey, the Iliad, and many other stories and legends depict Greeks as a traveling people, an enterprising people really. Alexandros Keklimenos is a merchant from Macedonia who's had a successful life up to now. Moving goods across the Adriatic has always been his trade, but he's hitting something of a midlife crisis. There must be more out there than just watching the world pass. Alexandros has always wanted to see the legendary east of the world, and he's even read about his namesake, Alexander the Great, who did indeed extend Greek culture far to the eastern world. Alexander and his companion cavalry rode hard, leaving their influence as they went. That's what our Alexandros will do. He shall ride east and create a new kingdom of the east, which will perpetuate his name into history. This video is a cut of a challenge I did on stream to play as a Greek and form Bactria, while only using cavalry units to do so. If we're being honest, it's not like this is something particularly difficult, but as you'll be seeing very soon, there were some difficulties that we faced on account of our cavalry army. In case you don't know, forming Bactria requires you to be either Zoroastrian, Buddhist, or Manichaean, and requires a culture which is descended from Afghan or Tajik, but those things will be relatively easy to achieve, I'm sure. Let's get into the game, starting in Macedonia. Like any landless adventure, things start off slow. We'll be completing contracts, getting gold, and getting an army. My secret technique to speed things up is the destination focus, which gives 50 prestige every time I hit a point of interest. The Eastern Mediterranean is full of history and therefore full of interesting places. We'll be using that to speed up our landless adventuring. I just wanted to say, by the way, that in my review of Wandering Nobles, I said that the perks should be rearranged so that the activities come way earlier, and then Paradox did exactly that. Are they watching? No, probably not. Anyway, the best way to visit a ton of points of interest is to do a pilgrimage to make a custom route. Sadly, this takes forever to set up because of how custom routes work. It's totally worth all the prestige and rewards though. Once we return home, we resume the contract game and Alexandros reconsiders some of his choices. He was looking for some adventure to spice up his midlife crisis, but it feels more like he's just gotten lost in a new drudgery. It's just job after job, broken up by the true joy of traveling to holy sites and seeing the world. After returning from Rome, Alexandros hosted some festivities. As far as his companions are concerned, everything is going great. They're making good money, and they've assembled a small army of elite cavalrymen. Alexandros took a toast at their little revelry and announced that times are changing. They're beginning the true purpose of their little group's assembly. It's time to move east through Anatolia and then down Mesopotamia. The rivers will carry them to Baghdad, and then further east will they go, braving mountains and chaotic Arab-Iranian struggles. The goal is to reach the great city of Markanda, as it's known in Greek. Samarkand, the crossroads of culture, is a beautiful city and was the capital of Sogdiana under the Achaemenids. Although there's no great Persian empire to tear down for Alexandros, he can still go east and make an empire of his own perhaps. He's getting ahead of himself though. The party traveled to Charcianon in central Anatolia to prepare for their trip further east. It was while doing some simple work in Anatolia that news of a new religious movement from Abkhazia reached Alexandros. The faith of the Gnostics has always been mysterious and interesting really. Heading east, the influence of Christianity diminishes in the face of mysterious Eastern faiths, and so Alexandros saw this break from the church as an opportunity. He's much more likely to get along in the east if he doesn't come across as some missionary, so he converted to Mandaism. They're not so different from the Christians, albeit with a more mystical system. Now he's something of a fugitive in these Christian lands, which means the trip east will become even more important for Alexandros. He'd get his first taste of combat when he and his cavalry were hired to fight some Turks in western Romania. For now, it's an army of mostly levies, which I got through a random event, but there's a little regiment of cataphracts supporting them. After winning a battle, the army marched into Theodosiopolis and sieged it down, earning their first victory in Alexandros' career. Against some random peasants that were revolting at the same time, Alexandros claimed yet another victory, and he was feeling pretty confident. He succeeded in bringing success to his employer, and with the money from that contract, he moved to Baghdad. Moving through the drylands and deserts of the Mashriq was certainly interesting. Alexandros has always read about these kinds of places, and he had seen Egypt many times when he was an up-and-coming trader. But the deserts of Arabia were different. Tyr treated these deserts like highways and valuable land, unlike the Egyptians, who stuck to the rivers and deemed the deserts uninhabitable. In places like Al-Haditha, there were actual families ruling over sand and calling it home. It goes to show that anywhere can be home with enough work. Yet, Alexandros sometimes misses his home in Macedonia. Now known as the mapmaker, Alexandros is in his mid-60s. He's well respected by his own followers, but he's feeling unaccomplished. He certainly hasn't lived up to his namesake by this time, but he's got an idea now. Beyond the Zagros Mountains is a land that was once called Bactria, which is home to some of the most ancient cultures and faiths of this era. The great city of Balkh once was the seat of a great satrapy, and to its north the city of Samarkand shines. Alexandros arrived in Balkh and resumed his usual contract jobs before quickly being lured to Debusia, just outside of Samarkand. By now, Alexandros has assembled his very own companion cavalry with a mixture of Greek cataphracts, Turkic horse archers, and Sogdian Tarkans. He's almost ready to begin his empire, which will be a humble little realm at the beginning. He's taking one last trip to Damascus while he thinks about all this. He's an old man now, but his will won't let him die until he's achieved something. Alexandros returned home from Damascus in November of 892, and then moved the camp to Nakshab before preparing to invade any of the disparate lords of the region and begin his rule. Many of these lords, as Muslims, have many alliances, and that makes it difficult to find a weak target. Nonetheless, his cavalry is extremely well trained and powerful. It's likely that they can take down opponents which would otherwise be far more powerful. In November of 893, war began, with Alexandros declaring war to take Debusia. His cavalry left the enemy in the dust, but they had trouble sieging the fortress. In good time, the horsemen would wipe out any caravans attempting to bring food into the place, and so they surrendered. Debusia is conquered. Now, Alexandros is a lord, albeit a meager one. He's old, but surrounded by friends and loved ones who followed him to the ends of the earth. Despite his old age, though, Alexandros is feeling great. Well, he's feeling fine, but for 72, feeling fine is pretty good. He's got himself a son, Romanos, who is so far shaping up to be a good boy. Regardless, to leave his son now would see him stuck in a sea of enemies with little hope of survival, so he'll conquer more land and give his son a more promising future. At least he'll try anyway. To the east, the great city of Samarkand looms over the fortress of Debusia. Alexandros will march on Samarkand to bring it into the fold using his cavalry. The city fell relatively easily, but after getting overconfident, Alexandros chased down his enemies on horseback to find himself outmatched in Bukhara. His cavalry weren't able to break the enemy lines, and for his folly, he would lose his closest companion, Symmachos the Young. It was heartbreaking, as Symmachos was his closest friend and his first companion. The man who slew him, Al-Hussein Tahirzde, would become Alexandros' rival, and the grieving Greek would stuff and preserve his best friend's corpse to keep him around, at least visually. The war took a turn for the worse, as Samarkand was reclaimed by the enemy, and Alexandros spent more and more time in his chambers grieving. Soon Debusia itself was under threat, and so he considered surrender, which would put the realm into debt. While Alexandros had intended to give his son a better chance on succession, he appears to only be burdening him with debt and shame so far. Rather than give up though, Alexandros snapped out of his melancholy and returned to the field with new vigor. He looked to the prisoners of war that were captured so far. Some of them were great warriors. On the condition that they converted to his faith and fought for him, they were freed. Some of them were castrated to make of them better servants, and then they were thrown into the field to fight. The siege of Debusia was broken, and in good time, the city of Samarkand fell once again, leading to victory for Alexandros. When all seemed lost, he snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. Samarkand is a city of vital importance to the region, and its acquisition will see great riches flow into the realm. Immediately, Alexandros began an inspection of the city to assess its taxes and assert control there. It's a truly beautiful place with many stories in its streets. Alexandros especially focused on teaching his son the importance of this sort of history, as Romanos, now a teenager, will have much to learn in order to become the true lord of Samarkand. The boy came of age in June of 901, and he's an adequate son, at least in terms of his abilities. He was married to Markia, an intelligent Greek lowborn who might help bring the realm to prosperity, even if she lacks noble blood. Shortly after, Alexandros hit 80 years of age. He doesn't have much time left in this world, and everyone knows it, but Romanos is ready for the throne. He was blessed enough to see the birth of his first grandson by Romanos, Makarios, who seems to have inherited his lowborn mother's intelligence. From here, the realm prospered under Alexandros' rule, and it expanded a little more into Orishana. However, it remained a Gnostic Greek realm surrounded by Muslim Turks and Iranians. It won't be safe here until Alexandros becomes the premier power of the region. He began a war with the Lord of Fergana to take the great fortress of Bukhara. This would be his greatest challenge yet, but the horsemen of Samarkand are ready for it. In the Battle of Wadar, Alexandros' forces were outnumbered nearly 3-1. Nonetheless, the slow, overconfident heavy warriors of Fergana were not well suited to open combat against mounted warriors in the plains. After routing the enemy, Alexandros took his men to Bukhara to begin a siege, but he turned around when he realized that his enemies were regrouping. He hunkered down in Samarkand as more enemies approached. When they saw the cavalry stationed in front of the great city, they were intimidated and ran, but smelling weakness, Alexandros pounced. This was his mistake. Confidence, so many times now, has been the downfall of Alexandros' army, and you'd think he'd learn, but with age comes stubbornness, perhaps. This mistake of his would end up being his last, not because it was so disastrous, but because his life came to its natural end at that point. Alexandros passed away in July of 906, leaving his realm to his son, Romanos, but splitting it with all of his brothers. As was the norm for this era, every son split the realm evenly, which would see the cities of Dabusia, Samarkand, and Osrashana becoming their own independent realms. Meanwhile, the scorned daughter, Viviana, who received no land, struck out on her own destiny, much like her father, and left. Who knows what she'll make of herself? Immediately, Romanos has decided to run a more cautious realm than his father. He'll first dethrone his brothers and assert his sole rule over the former lands of his father. That means he'll have to surrender to the Lord of Fergana, which does not put the realm to a good start. Romanos had an easy time defeating his brothers, who he would keep around the court as potentially useful knights or vassals one day. What was not going to be easy was defeating the realm deficit. Horses are expensive, and their riders even more so. The cavalry army. Its powerful steeds eat a lot. A weak horse can't carry all the armor and weaponry it needs to, but in the dry lands of Sogdiana, grazing land is hard to come by. Sure, Romanos could disband some of the cavalry, but then he'd be vulnerable to conquest. Thankfully, as he increases control over the realm, he is getting a better and better income. At a nearby tournament, Romanos was able to wrestle his way to some prize money, but didn't quite win the whole event, which could have awarded him much more money. Nonetheless, he did gain experience and get his name out there as a lord willing to fight, in the most literal sense, for his realm's success. In November of 912, the realm finally escaped debt and was in recovery. It was lucky that no one tried to invade, and why they didn't, Romanos had no idea. Some of the errant lords of the region had been snapped up by larger lords from far away. In particular, the Beni Jurid Shahdam, based in Kutul, had come to rule much of Sogd, which sandwiched poor Romanos between the well-connected lords of Fergana, the Turks of the Steppes, and a rising Shahdam to his south. The independence of Samarkand was looking like it might not last, but no matter what happens, Alexandros' influence will always be felt. Samarkand has been settled by Greeks at this point, and those Greeks will be hard-pressed to leave. The architecture of Samarkand will mostly remain as is, but as new buildings come up, there will be a distinctly Greek look to them for sure. Looking to further his fame and fortune, Romanos attended more tournaments, including a wrestling event which he won in Fergana. The lord who he began his reign at war with was now watching him put his best fighters into the dirt. Using the money from these victories, Romanos was able to consider more options, such as war. Until he acquires more land around him, he'll always be stuck at the whims of other lords with more power than him. The Shah of Kutul, Feridun, was weaker than his predecessors, and so his overgrown little kingdom must be cut down. In particular, their holdings in the Duchy of Sogd were quite the overextension. War began over the county of Nakshab, which was swiftly ended when Feridun himself was captured in battle at Varagshar. It was a well-chosen war, and a well-executed one. Like many wars, though, more than just victory came. From Kutul came a deadly plague which quickly reached Samarkand, and Romanos did not wish to spend money on countermeasures. Instead, he led his soldiers in battle in Zarafshan, where he could be away from the plague and hopefully not spread it. By the time the campaign was over, the plague had ended, and no one of any consequence was lost. Just peasants, who cares? The plague instead was disruptive enough that it led to the downfall of the Kutul Shahdam. From that dissolution came opportunity for more conquest. The Lord of Kish was vulnerable and conquered easily by Romanos. This was followed by another conquest for Firabir, which left the great fortress of Bukhara surrounded and vulnerable. The people of Bukhara gave their fealty to Fergana, and now that Romanos has enough power to contest them, he could finally take the city. And yet Romanos found his success unrewarded, at least personally. His dynasty will remember his great work to create a tenable realm, but Romanos will not live to see its fruits. He died from an aggravated wound from the previous war, leaving his son Makarios in charge of the realm. He's an intelligent and skilled man with a similarly ambitious mind to his ascendants, and he's got a brother, Polycarpos, who rules Osrashana to help him against Fergana. The war for Bukhara continues despite the death of Romanos. While Osrashana was being sieged, Makarios made significant progress on the siege of Bukhara, and once it fell, the war was soon over. Immediately, Makarios went to the city to inspect it. Bukhara is not as prestigious as Samarkand, but it is all the same famous and valuable. The Duchy of Sogd has been completely claimed, and it is now under total Greek rulership. In fact, Makarios truly loved the city of Samarkand. He loved it enough that he spent many nights there, exploring the city and getting to know its people. He became known as the Pauper King for his time among the commoners. For the first time, true levity came to the lords of Samarkand. They celebrated with a great feast. Afterwards, some Turks from Cha were invading Osrishana, but the conflict was doomed. Neither Makarios nor Polycarpos were prepared to fight rugged steppe nomads, and Makarios just wasn't that invested in defending his brother. Nonetheless, it was an omen to see that these steppe warriors were invading. There was a great steppe nomad empire forming, and before long, it would come bearing down on the nascent Samarkandian realm. The great Khan, Jirgal II, a Kazakh conqueror, has come to take what is his. Makarios must now face down the greatest enemy his dynasty has yet seen. There is no greater fear for any sedentary ruler than news that non-sedentary peoples are on the horizon. The pounding of hooves on the steppes and the stone-faced look of riders from a foreign land speaking an unfamiliar language, these are all the nightmares that the sedentary peoples of Central Asia deal with. At times, the nomads rely on intimidation to win, even if they'd otherwise lose, and at times, nomads can be bought off with riches. This is neither such time. A motivated Mongol is one which cannot be separated from his ambition, and yet Jirgal is in an interesting spot. Along the Oxus River, the Mongol Empire has taken many castles and cities which they have either burned down or pledged to protect. A foolish ruler would hear of Mongol war and prepare by sitting in their castles and waiting for doom. Makarios is no fool. He will bring shame to the Mongols, such that they will be forced to come to an agreement, but this is a sensitive matter. Part of what lets a Mongol keep power is that his subjects know that through submission they can be safe. If that reputation should be tarnished, then the empire might just collapse. Makarios knows this, and so began a campaign to destroy the fortresses and cities of the Oxus. Having recently been besieged by the Mongols, the fortresses here are weak and easily felled. The Mongol horde did not expect this, and took a long time to reach the region. They were expecting fear, not boldness. When the Mongol army did arrive, a battle ensued where Makarios led a valiant defense against the Mongols. Rather than let the battle go on, though, Makarios sat with the Great Khan and offered him a deal. News of the fall of the Oxus cities to a mere Greek could be kept secret if the Mongols would agree to a white peace. After all, it must be embarrassing for His Imperial Majesty Jirgal to have failed to protect his subjects. If the war dies now, the news dies with it. Jirgal agreed, and a white peace was signed. In return, the Oxus Valley's sacking was suppressed and a truce was signed. Sogd remains an independent realm for now. Makarios knows this truce won't last though. You'll have to make a new realm, a realm much greater and more powerful if he wants to survive these Mongols. That means that the lords around him must fall. It's time to form a new kingdom. A long life lived is a shameful thing for a king. That's not to say that he should die early, but that his rule should feel short for how eventful it is. A busy king forgets his own age, and Makarios, now a king, truly, has achieved greatness in his years. From the fertile Fergana Valley to the edge of the Hindu Kush Mountains, the kingdom of Markanda, named for Samarkand in Greek, has risen, its greatness unassailable by any who would challenge it. In the time of the establishment of Markanda, much has happened, some of which was important, some of which was not. Chiefly, the kingdom has been established, however the faith of the realm has taken a turn. The pacifist ways of the Mandean faith was not conducive to the foundation of a new kingdom, and so it was abandoned in favor of Manichaeanism. The two faiths are quite similar, but one does not have any dovish shackles to keep it grounded. There was another occurrence, one which I don't know how to explain really. The heir to the kingdom, Eusebius, was mysteriously murdered, which left the realm without an heir, it seemed. It was only because Eusebius had a son of his own that there was still an heir, but this son was nowhere to be found. Apparently, Eusebius did have a son, Vyacheslav, who no one could find. The poor baby must be lost, but where? Apparently in Croatia, but nobody at court knew that. Instead, it was understood that one of Makarios' other sons would inherit upon his death, which would surely be soon considering he's 69 years of age. Nice. I unironically did not know how the kid ended up there, and I know that I could have just disinherited him, but what could go wrong with keeping the kid around? He could make for a great king one day after all. In more important news though, the Greek culture of Samarkand has, after all these years, finally diverged into something of its own. Naturally, these Greeks would call themselves Bactrians, and they weren't all that different from their counterparts back home. They're just better adapted to the dry lands of this region. To lead his people down a path of cultural genesis would be the one-eyed pauper king Makarios' last major act, as about a year later, he passed away at the age of 74. His other sons were preparing to divide up the kingdom amongst themselves, until a mysterious group of travelers speaking a foreign language arrived at the court in Samarkand. They brought with them the son of Eusebius, who everyone thought had vanished. Vyacheslav, barely able to walk and talk, arrived and took the throne as the rightful heir. This boy, a foreigner in faith and culture to this land, was met with total shock. He was indeed the correct heir, much to the chagrin of his uncles. He was also completely hated by all of his vassals and family for his foreignness, but a great king he would be all the same. There were rebellions, and there was unrest, but the lords of Markanda kept their loyalty and fought to preserve Vyacheslav's rule. They fought well and even imprisoned the treasonous uncle of the king, Romanos. The crazed genius was forced to renounce his claims and then allowed to go free. Mercy, a rare thing among kings, was a meaningful choice by the young king. So far he's turning into quite the ruler. A temperate but deceitful man he is. Deceit may be a sin, but it's a tool in the hands of a real ruler. He was even a multilingual king from a young age. At just 12 years old, he spoke already 4 languages, albeit all of them very foreign to his subjects. That doesn't mean everything was smooth, though. The Seljuk Turks, new players in this region, are looking to take a bite out of Markanda in its time of seeming prosperity. They're looking to conquer Balkh, and the Seljuk horde is indeed powerful enough to do so. The Samarkandian army was wiped out, to a man, and the Seljuks had their way with the rest of Tokharistan. That land was valuable, and its loss will be felt, but Balkh will be redeemed, rest assured. After all, that land had also become home to a new Vlach population under Vyacheslav, whose rule saw many exiled Roma making their way over. Refugees they were, but welcomed in a realm with a king that speaks their language were they too. For his invasion, the Sultan Tugrul will pay, and if Vyacheslav can't make him pay with war, he'll make him pay with his life. You see, our king has grown into quite the capable schemer as he enters adulthood. He's a vengeful, deceitful man with the brains to match his whims. Both Tugrul and his heir Mehmed would indeed find themselves dead at the hands of Vyacheslav, and in such a way that the rising Seljuk Empire would collapse. The Sultan Junaid, a mere child, cannot possibly hold on to his land, and in some time, the entire realm will likely collapse into total disarray. To celebrate, Vyacheslav would travel throughout his realm to visit his vassals and inform them of his plans for the realm. He'll be reconquering the land lost to the Seljuks and taking even more. The king dreams of Bactria, a land of religious tolerance and a center of culture. Living in Samarkand has given the king a strong understanding of the importance of tolerance. He himself is completely foreign to the people here, but thanks to their tolerance, he's been able to rule effectively. He had his first daughter, Alexandria, in October of 989, and although she's a Catholic, she'll be raised among many tutors of all sorts of different faiths. Remember her, she will become important one day. From here, Vyacheslav planned out a long trip, an odyssey, if you will, to the west. He's a good Christian, and he intends to visit the holy site of Canterbury. Along the way, he'll stop by every interesting place that he can. He's intending to leave the realm in the power of his advisors, and return when he has become a wiser man. This will be a dangerous trip, but it will be enlightening. So much culture and so much history to see. Vyacheslav will leave his realm one man, and return a new one. The question is, what will become of his people while he's gone? As for the future of Vyacheslav to worry about. This trip will take an estimated 7 years, not including the almost certain delays that will come. He came home, a man of great fame, and changed, of course. His vengeful nature was altered, and he became a man of mercy. A holier man for a holier land, Vyacheslav indeed was changed by his trip. The court loved him more than they ever did. The Vlach people of Balkh, which he reconquered upon his return, evolved into a new culture as well, called Romani. They're oriented more closely to pastoralism and horse breeding, making them able to foster an even greater cavalry army than ever. Shortly after that change, there was another change. Alexandria, the beautiful firstborn daughter of the king, was showing signs that the very soul of Alexander the Great was within her. Obviously, given her name, this made total sense, but clearly she must be given special attention as a tool of fate so that her potential might not be squandered. Indeed, she grew to be shrewd and honest and a competent commander, while her diplomatic abilities are far and above anyone her age, or even those triple her age, really. Also, Vyacheslav embraced Manichaeanism afterwards, believing similarly to his great-great-grandfather Alexandros that Christianity's influence this far east is too weak to be worth holding to. Not just that would be changing, though. In the face of an evolving world, the king evolved his realm in June of the year 1007. No longer is Markanda a mere feudal realm, but now it is a true imperial bureaucracy. The reason this change is so important is that the far more competent Alexandria can be selected for the throne. Rulership for a woman in a male-dominated society is difficult, but she's far too important to let sit at the court doing nothing but being pretty. It will take a lot of influence to make happen, but whatever it takes to put Alexandria on the throne, it will be done. Empire is always a strange thing. The ambition of one person to reach for power and keep it for their family or their own self often leads to the creation of a system by which the underlings overtake the emperor eventually. It's difficult to run a large kingdom without support from the bottom up, and yet that support is in itself the end of empires in many ways. Keeping the little folk in line is of great importance, and so, early on in the life of this bureaucratic kingdom of Markanda, Vyacheslav put together some ruffians to burn down the estate of a powerful enemy. The Kumiji family was gaining strength, and for that, they were put in the ground. In place of the lords of Badakhshan, the Kumiji family was removed from power, to be replaced by Roman, who will hopefully govern with responsibility, competence, and loyalty. From here, rulership of the Markanda kingdom would boil down to mostly regular responsibilities like checking in on the lords, assigning governors, managing plagues, and raising a family. But after a great plague in March of 1017, it was time to shake things up. The realm capital was moved to Balkh to reorient the realm around the south. Samarkand is secure, and the countryside is the royal domain to the emperor, but Balkh is also a famous city. In fact, Balkh is the capital of the old Bactrian Empire. It's a symbolic move to put the capital there, as well as a strategic one. It's, in its own way, an announcement that the empire intends to expand. The evolution of Samarkand, a holy site of Manichaeanism, led to a great legend about Vyacheslav and his holiness, which would inspire the eventual construction of a great shrine in Dabusia. The money required to build it will need some time to come in, though. Rather than spend money on shrines, Vyacheslav spent his money on war. The kingdom of Dalam, which had expanded into Khorasan, was looking vulnerable, and although they'd filled the power vacuum that the Seljuks left behind after their collapse, they were no match for the Markandan armies. The Dalamites fell easily, and for the first time in a while the kingdom expanded. The Lord of Merv, Inal, is a bitter old man who refused to leave his castle despite the war. A Turkish Muslim, he was unhappy to swear fealty to Vyacheslav, but he had little choice. He was allowed to keep his land and traditions, but only if he submitted, which he did eventually. The momentum of war carried through into the south, with the Lords of Sistan falling as well. Where Vyacheslav was getting worried was his move into the mountains of Gur. Horses are not well suited to this cramped terrain, so he was apprehensive, but with large enough numbers advantage, victory can be assured. In particular, the fortress of Bamiyan was a real obstacle, but it controls the vital passages from India to Bactria. The Indians and Afghans have been fighting over these mountains for a long time, and indeed the whole region is just a complete chaos. Vyacheslav entered the ring with his men, but found himself mostly outmatched by the more adaptable Indian and Afghan rulers of the region. Nonetheless, he didn't give up even after being routed. This campaign of war would see the king's daughter, Alexandria, often advising on the war council, and because of that, the perception of some women in war improved significantly across the Romani culture. The right to prove started developing in the culture, but it would take time for the acceptance of women in the army to really come to be. Regardless, the war in Afghanistan continued, with a decisive battle in Panjshir seeing the Indians defeated and Ghazna conquered. Peace would not last though, as after the Indians moving into Bamiyan accepted a white peace, the Markandan army was redirected to the west again. A massive war to take all of Khorasan was on the horizon, but it's not quite time yet. First, the game needs to crash. It's been known to happen on occasion. Upon reloading the game, it's become clear that Vyacheslav didn't have too much longer left in his life, so my total focus became getting Alexandria to inherit everything. She's the best choice for leadership, but the nation is biased against her. The king's ambitions, however, were disrupted when the Khorasanis declared war for Herat. This land is valuable to both sides of the war, albeit it is forever ruled by the stubborn Turkish Muslims that call it home. They simply can't be edged out. Unfortunately, the Battle of Karuk saw the Markandan armies retreating, beaten. Rather than lose men over lordship of a troublesome vassal, Vyacheslav surrendered and lost some land. It will be avenged in good time. Yet, age is sneaking up on the old king. Time takes its toll, but before it drags the once exiled Romanian king to the grave, his influence in the realm would be solidified via a new culture. When a Bactrian and a Roma come together, their culture becomes a-Romanian, and it's truly the best of both worlds. They've got the heavy cataphracts of Bactria and the light Koni from Romania, which together form a powerful cavalry force. Of course, the Roman origins of the Bactrians have carried through, and the Greek language, being much more famous, has supplanted the strange Scythian Dacian language that was forming in the area. The flame of ambition in this old king has petered out for the most part now, as he's spending his time enjoying the last of his reign. Naturally, his peace would be disrupted by the other lords, believing that his peace was weakness. The mountains of Afghanistan have proven to be quite the difficult position to hold, but so far, Vyacheslav hasn't had to make any concessions there. After news of another war from the north came in, from a Turkic conqueror this time, the king was done. He received the news and stood up, ready to fight, but had to sit back down, for he had pain in his knees. A few hours later he collapsed and was bedridden. He passed away in his bed, peacefully from age. In his place rose the great queen, Alexandria, the tool of fate. Alexandria was appointed the successor to the realm, at the behest of a ton of influence from the late king. He made a wise choice though, as Alexandria, although old, is extremely talented. She immediately got to work fighting the wars that plagued her father, one of which she swiftly won. The Turks from Cha were a little more difficult, albeit they had trapped themselves in the Fergana Valley, where the Markandan cavalry would thrive. After two immensely decisive battles, where Alexandria showed her strategic genius, the war was over. She became known as the Stout for her victories, and she used that momentum to finish the campaign her father had begun. The region of Khorasan, which was so difficult to hold before because of the fierce Daylamites, would come into the realm under Alexandria's leadership. This war would surely be what Alexandria would be remembered for, as the sheer vastness of Khorasan will nearly double the total land area of Markanda, although there are fears of taking on such a large piece of heathenous foreign land will destabilize the realm. Whatever instability might come, Alexandria can surely handle it. Unfortunately for her, though, the opportunists of India did make an attempt at invading Afghanistan again, and this time, Alexandria set her priorities straight. She let the Indians make some sieges and waste their time and lives, after which she simply let them have the land eventually. She also had to deal with some Turks coming for Fergana again, though. Sometimes war just keeps coming, and not much can be done about it, really. Fergana cannot be given up so easily, though, unlike Bamiyan, so Alexandria will fight when the time comes. The war in Khorasan finally ended in August of 1045, although the vassals of that realm had broken off, which resulted in a slightly smaller conquest than otherwise could have been. Nonetheless, a conquest is a conquest, and the rest can be conquered later. For now, the Turks have to be driven out of the north. War just wouldn't stop, though. Even after the Turks were defeated, more wars came and went, with Alexandria's army being dragged across the realm to fight. The last war ended in victory, of course, in September of 1050, at which point the realm enjoyed true peace for some time. At least until another war came in, this one from an Iranian conqueror looking to reclaim Khorasan. The queen is getting exhausted. And trust me, I was too. The conqueror is no mere pushover, and posed a very real threat, which naturally cascaded into other rulers seeing an opportunity to fight. Once again locked into a loop of opportunistic wars, the queen found herself frustrated by the obnoxious lords around her. How can they witness each and every war go in her favor and still feel they can win? Maybe because she's a woman. Rather than keep on dealing with these annoying wars, she accepted white peace for the first time, which would let the realm recover and rest for some time, hopefully. Then, I went on some rant about linguistics. Don't worry about that. That sort of content is exclusive to the stream viewers. Check out the live streams for the run if you're interested in an uncut experience, by the way. Link in the description. Finally, Alexandria, already an old queen, would meet her end in July of 1062, where, during a vassal rebellion, she just didn't have any more fight in her. She was a tool of fate, destined to become the Bactrian empress, but she was too caught up in the frivolity of meaningless wars to do so. Instead, the mantle would pass on to her son, Stelian. He's not an awful king, but he's not an amazing one either. Stelian is unfortunately not well suited to rulership because he's a coward. Some say he's even a puppet of Zacharias of Gur, whose scheming had gone unnoticed in Alexandria's reign. Anyway, to save you the time of all the pointless wars that kept happening, I will skip ahead a bit to 1068, where I remembered that administrative realms can make extra men-at-arms, and that was why I'd been so weak. The reason everyone was invading me was that I wasn't using my full power by accident. Now that I'm putting forward my entire power, the neighbors of the realm should be too afraid to declare more wars. In particular, new technology in the High Medieval era, which the Romanian culture has recently entered, has unlocked new castles and buildings which will massively increase my power. By July of 1079, there were over 10,000 men available in the army, and Stelian has properly secured the realm. He's got a massive income and a massive force, which he has fielded with that income. This power gave the king confidence to reassert his realm over the Hindu Kush mountains. Although it was unexpected, Stelian would become the king that finally brought Kabulistan in full into the realm, and after a few small wars to take back what remained of an independent Khorasan, he was ready to create Bactria. Well, not quite. Only a character with a culture derived from Tajik or Afghan culture can make Bactria, so we'll have to wait for some cultural acceptance first. There was peace. I know I've said that a few times, but this time I mean true peace. No war came to Markanda for some 3 decades, which saw Stelian unable to make the new culture before his own death. In February of 1105, the realm welcomed Lucian to the throne, whose primary goal was to accept the Tajiks of Khorasan and unite the kingdoms of Markanda into one great empire. Within just a few months, the Neo-Bactrian culture, a hybrid of cultures from Romania, Greece, and Iran, came together. It was centered on bulk, and its foundation was accompanied with a grand wedding. Where the souls of spouses are unified in a wedding, so too will the kingdoms of Bactria be united, as Lucian took the stage. He married the couple, whose names he really didn't care about, but he accompanied their unification with an announcement that times are changing. He's no mere king now. Now, the Keklimenos family rule, as Basiliuses of Bactria and lords of the crossroads of culture. Technically, this marks the end of the run, but I showed off the power of my army one last time by invading Punjab. The war went quite smoothly. The Battle of Nandana saw many horsemen of Bactria outmaneuvering, outpacing, and outdoing the Indian armies. I also took the time to explain some of the modifiers which were giving me such a strong army. Advantage is hugely important since the patch that buffed it from 2% to 10%, although of course you can change the in-game rules if you prefer that the battles not be so wild. Lahore fell, and with it all of Punjab, as Lahore and its hinterlands had become a great breadbasket for the Empire. Where Bactria would go in the future is something we don't know though, as I was done with the run by this point. I had achieved everything I'd wanted to. It's a beautiful nation, this Bactria. It's a nation which has prospered in the face of a chaotic world. Many of the world's greatest kingdoms and empires have collapsed, for better or worse. Great conquerors have left their mark on the world over the centuries, but Bactria stands strong. While nomad lords in the steppes come together and move west, they know to avoid the lands of the Oxus River, which are far beyond their reach so long as the Keklimenos family rules. Alexandros Keklimenos, who led his lineage to Samarkand, would smile upon this realm, knowing that it will be remembered alongside the great Hellenistic empire of Alexander the Great. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for your time.